Are you a farmer or butcher ready to master direct-to-consumer marketing and meet success? Then you're in the right place. I'm Jared Aachen, the founder of Chop Local. Each episode of this podcast features interviews with farmers and butchers who have built successful direct-to-consumer meat businesses, and they're going to share their secrets for success with you. From actionable tips to inspiring stories, this podcast has ingredients you will need to succeed in the meat business. After the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social. And check out the rest of our educational resources at choplocaluniversity.com. Now, let's turn it over to my business partner, Katie, to get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Meat Success Podcast. I am Katie Olthoff, the co-founder of Chop Local and Chop Local University, and I am back with one of our favorite hot topics here in 2026, and that is AI. Not artificial insemination, of course, but artificial intelligence this time around. So I am joined here with Associate Professor from the Department of Ag Economics at Purdue, Chad Fiechter. I heard Chad give a presentation in April at a conference that I attended, and it was all about AI use in agriculture and among farmers. And what I thought was really interesting were some of the guidelines that Chad has put in place for responsible AI use. And I thought that that would be great for all of you to hear today. So thank you, Chad, for joining us. Are your classes all finished up for the year?
Yeah, my pleasure to join you because everything's done.
Yeah, I thought the timing was probably going to work out pretty well here. We're recording this on May 20th, but it will actually should publish tomorrow, May 21st, so everything will be very timely. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this kind of interest in AI.
So I'm from northeastern Indiana. I grew up on a farm and then came to Purdue for an undergraduate degree. And then actually went home and farmed with my parents for about 10 years. And then I joke that I had a midlife crisis, but it's not a joke. I hit 30 and kind of became aware that maybe I wanted to think about doing something else. And a friend suggested grad school. And I just kind of fell in love with research. And clearly the subject matter that I'm the most aware of is sort of farm management. And so that became sort of a natural fit. So I came to Purdue 3 years ago. And then in the midst of that time, right, is the evolution of AI, right? Like everything becomes possible. And I would say that I'm kind of not a technology curmudgeon, but I'm slow to adopt in my personal life. And so I felt like when I saw Gen AI coming, I don't know if it was just a feeling of I need to figure this thing out a little more because I don't think I have a role anymore that I can just bury my head in the sand. So in the last about a year and a half, I've made a really concerted effort to actively use AI, with sort of the extension folks that I work with and farmers, but then also in sort of my role as a professor, work with students and especially with graduate students who are sort of pursuing sort of to integrate AI into their research. And so that's where I feel like the most practical sort of insights have come is largely interacting with students and sort of seeing great successes and maybe also some pitfalls as we sort of try to integrate it.
Yeah, that's what I think is top of mind right now for me is that there are so many opportunities and there's so many, ways that we can apply it in our businesses nowadays, but I don't feel like I or my audience necessarily has an understanding of what those risks might be in doing so. So we're going to talk about some of those risks, but let's start a little bit talking about farm management or business management. What are some of the ways that you are seeing farms and small businesses using AI in their day-to-day operations or in their financial management and that type of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like the evolution started with sort of a Google plus, right? I'm going to Google something plus a little more. And then I have seen sort of as people get more comfortable with sort of the solutions that it's bringing or kind of evaluating, can it generate this for me or can it do this for me or can it give me insights? The more comfort that there is sort of already starting to be, I'm observing people sort of using it to think about their financial statements and about, I teach computing financial ratios. Probably not a huge thing that's going to happen, right? There's a calculator that can do it for you. You don't have to remember those off the top of your head unless you're a banker and you need to be remembering those off the top of your head. But I think that the sort of take it to the furthest level is I've also seen farmers who have actually developed individualized applications, web-based digital applications for their specific farm. So if there's a particular thing that is difficult for them to sort of make decisions on, I've seen them create applications that they can use to help make decisions. So one example would be there was a farmer who created a visualization that would try to show where grain in a bin, moistures in grain in a bin, based upon output from their grain dryer. So like I've seen sort of like the whole scope of like the Google Plus to all the way up to people generating things that are sort of additional to their suite of probably softwares they're already using.
Yeah, that's where, I feel very comfortable using ChatGPT or Gemini and putting in a prompt and getting some information back. But I feel like that creating a custom GPT or a custom like that is like the next level that I think I'm not there yet. I don't know if most of our listeners are there yet. So if they wanted to do something, if they were like, hey, I really wish that I had a custom AI tool that would help me figure out profit margins on different cuts of meat, or something like that. Is that something you could help them with, or where would you send them to start developing something like that?
Oh man, I love this question. Okay, so I think that like the beauty of Gen AI, so generative AI is the all of these, commercially available Claude, Llama, Gemini, ChatGPT, right? Fill in your favorite X AI, is that they are so good at interacting with people. And so the way that you get more out of it is continuing the interaction, right? And so in the past, the way I would interact with technology is like once I hit a roadblock, I would get frustrated and be like, well, this hammer doesn't use for this nail. I need to go find a new hammer. But this hammer, now you can talk to it and be like, why didn't this work? Right? Why didn't we get the thing? What I wanted you to do was drive the nail straight. And what you didn't do is you didn't do that, right? Well, we're clearly not doing that with a hammer, right? But with Gen AI, that's the capacity, right? You can actually ask it how to use it better, right? So it's like, it's not intuitive. I'm 40. So like, it's not intuitive to me. It might be for my 7-year-old, but like, I think this idea of working with the technology to learn how to use it and how asking it literally in the same way that you would be talking to a coworker or to an advisor about like, how would I use your services better? Like, what are you observing that didn't work, right? So I think that's why I get excited is even though I've had a year and a half to interact with Gen AI, I don't think any one of your listeners is more than 2 days away from meeting me exactly where I am today because of that ability to work with the technology instead of be like, well, I know if you do this, you get this, because it will tell you if you're not happy with this thing that you did, just keep iterating. We'll get there, but you have to be patient to get to that thing you want.
So can I just go into ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, that I've been working on this project because I've been asking you questions about it, and just say to it, how could you help me work on this project better? What could you design for me that would help me, manage this better or stay, I don't even know the possibilities, but what I'm getting from you is that you're telling me that ChatGPT probably knows the possibilities and can tell me what those are. I don't even know what I don't know, but ChatGPT knows it.
I treat it like that constantly. And we can get into sort of the skepticism. There's a healthy skepticism that you apply. But I think while you're sort of iterating, like, man, I would just keep iterating. Just keep asking it. Well, I don't really like that. What I like, I'm trying to think of a specific example where, I've really sort of worked and been like, you're wrong. Like what you just said is wrong. What I want to do is I want this. And so how do we get from here to what I said I wanted? So my wife jokes that like I'm in too deep, right? But I honestly, it's not sort of like an emotional or like in the same way that I would talk to you where like I'm observing your face and I like sort of the feedback in a relationship. It's more just like, no, this is like, you didn't do the thing I want, right? Keep going. We have to keep going. There's something more at the end that we're looking for. And I think with people, we kind of censor ourselves and we're kind of like, well, I can't say that what they just generated isn't good. With AI, you can literally say it's terrible.
I had this conversation with a colleague after your presentation at the conference because I said, what I love about working with with ChatGPT is my tool of choice right now, is that if I were to hire an intern or an employee, that person has feelings. And I am the type of, my listeners know this, but I have 3 kids. I am a mom. I used to be a teacher. Just like you said, I am balancing that person's feelings with how much feedback do I give them, And with ChatGPT, I don't have to think about their feelings. I don't have to think about if this is going to decrease their motivation long term to come back and be a great employee for me, or if I'm going to have to rehire somebody else if I upset them too much. Or, I can just give them feedback and say, ChatGPT, that is wrong, and you need to redo it. And I have an example. Listeners know, if they listened last week, it is grant season. I am writing a grant application. So that's a project that I'm working on. Yesterday, I asked it for suggestions for a title for this grant project. And it came back with several suggestions and then said, if you're going to focus on this and this, then I think that this is your strongest title option. But if you're going to focus on that, and I came back and I said, no, I told you I'm not including this number 1 that you mentioned. I'm not including that in my grant project. Please remember this for your future suggestions, that I am not including that in my grant project, so that we can, I hope that was a good example and like one of the things that I'm using it for right now.
So I interact with undergraduate students a lot. And what I would say my criticism of sort of like the general or average undergraduate student is what they're looking for is this thing to give them an answer. And that doesn't necessarily work. What this thing should be is like, it's a really thoughtful, it's got a lot of information thought partner. So you can just sort of say, well, what do you think about this? Well, I don't really like that. I'm still the creative person. And as much as I'm an economist, and so you could say I'm cold and hard and dead inside, but like I'm still a human, right? Like, and I still see economics more in this sort of, it's creative and we're thinking about things in creative ways in the same way that a marketer or a communicator would think about it. Now it's a little more rigid probably than that, but I think the part is like, I'm the creative partner, right? I'm the creative side. And this thing is sort of a thought partner that is sort of helping me get to what I want to do is this thing. How would I get there? So in my work, I would say that I spend tons of time with AI where I'm not just like, hey, do this task for me and then spit it back out. It's like, do this task for me. And then I'm evaluating and I'm like, that task was done poorly. Or you really did the first part super well, but you did not take my direction at all for the second part, right? And so I iterate even on emails. If I want to change an email, it might be several iterations. It's not just like, hey, generate an email for Katie, right? It's multiple different sort of iterations and thinking about it. So it gives me a leg up and I'm more productive, but it's not like I just don't do any of the tasks I used to do. I'm just doing them with AI as opposed to, hey, AI assistant, do this thing for me. I have friends, they're further ahead than me on automating tasks. I am still an active partner in sort of every task that I am doing with AI, where it's iterative and I'm working with it and I'm trying to get to these solutions. And it's probably just because of the applications that I'm doing too.
Okay, so I use a grant example. We've talked more about marketing, and that's what I've talked a lot about on the podcast so far with AI. But let's say I did want to upload financial documents. Is there risk in sharing that type of information with these platforms, and how do we mitigate that?
That's a great question. As an example, I just recently was like thinking about a different mortgage rate. And so I was poking around on the internet and it asked me to put in my phone number, right? And I think I've gotten like 25 phone calls a day for the last 3 weeks. Yeah. Bad decision, boneheaded decision, right? I should be better than this, but I'm not, right? I still just didn't really register. So like protecting information that's sensitive, you should always go to, in my opinion, you should always go to, if it's sensitive, if you're nervous about someone else having access to it, you shouldn't upload it. Now, that's a broad life skill sort of advice, not a AI specific advice. Because with financial information, when you think about it, is if you're not giving them your bank account numbers, if you're not giving them your social security number, if there really isn't something that would be beneficial if someone knew it, right? If you're thinking about sort of your cost of production for freezer beef, do you really care if your neighbor knows? And how would they actually get to the place where they could evaluate it? It's not like AI is like, hey, Joe down the road, they're actually paying more for feed. It's not prompting people, to be like, take advantage of them. Those kinds of things, even if it feels uncomfortable, like I would still think about, am I comfortable sort of like that this is out there but like that being out there is pretty difficult to sort of come back to someone using it maliciously against you. That would be my point. Just to reiterate, sensitive information, that's a no-go. And there's not a world where I'm comfortable sort of advocating for that to be part of anything that would be uploaded or provided.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I know one thing you mentioned in your presentation, I think, is that each of these platforms have different, guidelines for their own privacy restrictions, or I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. They say in their terms and conditions, your information may be used for training or it may not, so we need to read those. If we're concerned about it, we need to read those. And those things change at different levels. Like I do pay $20 a month, I think, for ChatGPT. And so mine might be different than someone who's just using the free version all the time, but we need to check into that, right?
I would advocate for the paid versions. You can get the personal paid versions, but you can also get organizational paid versions. And one of the things that typically comes in those organizational paid versions is sort of like there's data barriers. So that data would be available to everyone inside of your team, but it wouldn't be available for them to train the model or external to sort of like, it's not going to become part of the internet where someone could view it later. So I really like that. That's how I work with my team internally. So I have 8 grad students that are on an organizational team with me. So I can see what they're doing. They can see what I'm doing. Data's not going out of our kind of shared sandbox, and we turned that off, right? So our current application of choice is Claude. And so that's what we just went in and elected, sort of not to have the ability for Claude to train their models on our data. And there's, sort of simple toggle switches that you turn on and off. But that's also a thing that I asked Claude about. So to get back to how do you do this, it is something that I literally chatted with Claude about. Hey, I'm concerned about data privacy within the sort of subscription model that I have currently. How do I limit the ability for someone to sort of observe any of the data that my team would be working on? Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, Chad. Blah, blah, blah. And it told me how to do all that thing. So I think that's why I love this technology is it feels a little more inclusive for the person who is willing to sort of like just ask.
Yeah. Somebody asked me this the other day. How do you know that Claude did not hallucinate in its response to you? How do you know that it didn't just make something up? And maybe in that example or in other examples, how do you safeguard against that? Because I have had times where I can't think of a specific example right now, but it will tell me something and I know that that's not correct, and I'll give an example. I use it a lot for technology troubleshooting, okay? So I run Google ads for clients and Facebook ads, and I swear every time you log into Google or Meta, they have changed something in their workflow, and everybody's websites are different and getting the data connected. And so I will go into ChatGPT and say, I'm trying to configure conversion tracking on a WordPress website. What do I need to do? And it'll start guiding me through, here's the exact steps that you need to do. But half the time the menus are wrong or whatever. And I'm like, no, you're wrong, ChatGPT. And it'll come back and say, oh, you're right. Or I made that up, or I made a mistake there. So if you're asking Claude, back to this example, you're asking Claude, what are my data privacy protections on this thing? How do you know that it gave you the right info?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer because I think, and I'm not advocating for AI, but I'm going to make an analogy. So as a professor, like this is new to me, the majority of my life has been spent as a consumer of something professors made as opposed to sort of a creator of things professors have made. And so it's interesting because there's a new sort of gravity that's put on the things that I say because I have a title or, even if I don't have an ethos of like, you should trust me, I'm an expert, just because there's a thing. And I'm wrong. There's times where I'm wrong, right? There's times where I give advice or I say, this is the way this looks. And so I think that one of the errors, or the laziness that we've applied to AI is to say like, oh, well, it's wrong some of the time. And I'm like, yeah, but we are too. With my kids, I'll correct them sometimes and then later be like, hey, you remember when I told you that thing? That was totally wrong, right? Okay, so then getting to, how do we identify where it's wrong or where it's misleading, right? And a lot of times on something that I think matters, I have multiple sources, right? So I'll say, can you provide for me the source where you pulled that information and the link to go look at it? Or in my work with research, one of the things that I find AI still very lacking in is the ability to identify actual, verified, peer-reviewed studies and the insights from those studies and how I would integrate them into how I'm thinking. But it is very good as a thought partner to say, what are the dimensions of this project that I'm working on, and where would be some articles that would be related to this thing? And then going and finding those myself, seeing my own eyes on them, reading the first parts before I'm like, hey, this is a foundational piece to the way I want to think about this project. So I think in the example of security, right, I would ask Claude, and then I would go and I would search Reddit. I would search any Google search that I could come up with to be like, okay, does anyone else had this experience? How recent was it? What did they do? And trying to find multiple sources that would verify if this is an important thing for me, that I'm not just sort of taking it as like wholesale. Now, to be totally honest with you, one of my first sort of like where I fell in love with AI was making coffee. Pretty low stakes, right? I can make a bad cup of coffee. Evaluate how high stakes is the thing that I'm asking. If it's a high stakes thing, I think I would come up with, you should ask it for sources. You should ask for, where did you get that? Because there's been times where it's told me research insights that are directly incorrect, right? Where it will take a paper and it will literally say that it is synthesizing it and it is not correct, right? And so in those cases, I almost always am looking for multiple sources. I want to get my eyes on them. I want to see what they said. But I think that like it's just having a healthy skepticism for the topics that matter.
I was thinking about this the other day because I asked ChatGPT a question that I might have normally, I'm a Facebook group junkie, so I might have normally gone to a Facebook group and asked a bunch of other moms how to handle X, Y, or Z, but I asked ChatGPT. And then I was thinking about, well, what if ChatGPT did give me the wrong information? What if that group, like, is it really worse than listening to random people on the internet that don't know me and don't have the whole context? The other thing, going back to ChatGPT versus an intern, same deal. You're not just going to take your intern or your grad student's work and accept it as absolutely 100% correct without looking it over too, right? So
no, I think you hit on a key, like that's a key sort of philosophical question around AI that I think everyone sort of has to come to terms with, right? If I'm listening to a podcast and writ large taking what they say as truth, am I applying the same skepticism that I've applied to AI that I do to sort of like these other sources of information? And I think there's already instances where AI is just like a really good synthesizer of information. That's the one thing it does really, really well. So if it has access to that right information and it's reading it correctly, it's probably pretty good. But that doesn't mean you should take it as truth. You should go look and make sure, are there other sources that can confirm this? Because I think that's the key, is like just having a healthy skepticism is the way that I would just pitch everybody approach AI.
Yeah. So this is maybe a good segue in, I believe I remember you mentioning in the presentation that you did that one of your requirements for your grad students is that if they are going to use AI to find research articles or peer-reviewed articles, and they are going to cite those in their own work, they need to actually go and read the article, which that I think totally makes sense because you do want to verify that that's what the article actually said, right? And that AI has summarized it properly or not pulled it completely out of context. I worry a lot about producing marketing materials, which could be an email newsletter, it could be just a social media caption, about producing those materials and they appearing very overtly AI. And I remember that some of the things that you mentioned that you require of your students, I thought those are good guidelines for maybe my farmers and butchers too, to make sure that what they're producing is not AI slop, right?
I'll go back to a core sort of like principle that is not mine. It was proposed to me by a friend. And basically that like whether you attribute, I think we'll get into the attributing sort of credit to AI, but whether you attribute the sort of contributions of AI or not, you're still the author. You're still the residual claimant for what you have produced, whether it was produced by yourself or whether it was produced with AI. And so having sort of that, am I satisfied with this thing having my name on it, is like, I think the best ethic that I can have for regulating, right? Am I satisfied with what's being going on? Because it needs, what I need to do is view it as attributable to my work and to what I'm doing. So in the case of a professor, it's clear. If they can show that I am making stuff up, probably don't have a job. But in the case of sort of like small business owners, it's a little damaging if what you're putting out is not quality, if it's not your best foot forward, or if you just didn't read it well, right? If you send an email and it's not worded well, like that kind of comes back on the person who sent the email, not on AI, right? No one's like, oh, well, you probably generated with AI, no problem. It's like, really, in the world of AI, that's what we got? Wow. In some senses, I think it's raised the barrier, right? So it's like, hey, grammar mistakes, spelling, are you serious? That's still happening? So I think like those kinds of things is like, I love that as sort of with my grad students, like, are you really happy with the output that you have created and that your name is attached to it and that it will be attributed to you into the future, right? The other part is overtly acknowledging where we have used AI. So one of the fears that I have, right, is that a student will bring something to me and claim it as their own work. And at the end of it, it's not their own work, right? And so now I have this next layer of sort of accountability as an author to go back and be like, is this really sort of the truth, right? Did we generate the thing that was correct? And so with that, what I always advocate for students are, let's be extremely transparent in where we have used AI. And so if it would be anything that we would attribute to another person, a quote, a citation, like even advice, right? If in a conversation with you, I would attribute, well, my mom was the one who said that as opposed to me. I am just very for extreme transparency around disclosing what I have used AI for, because I think that's just a way to sort of pull out maybe some of the weird things that could happen when you're trying to obscure away that, no, I created this thing. Well, does it matter whether you created it or whether AI created it if the output is awesome? If the marketing material rocks and you say you were helped with AI, great.
Here's where I think the problem is. Okay, I'm thinking about like you know economics, business management, that type of thing, right? I could go to ChatGPT or Claude and say, how should I handle this bookkeeping thing in QuickBooks? And it could give me information, or it could tell me, X, Y, or Z. And that is not my specialty whatsoever. And so I could ask it to help me write a farm management, some sort of resource related to farm management and financial management, but I don't have enough of context or background information myself to like be a judge of whether that information is good and should be associated with my name. And that's how I see some small businesses, including my farms and small processors that I work with. They are creating marketing materials, but because their expertise is in farm production or, animal management or whatever it may be, their expertise is not in marketing and they're using AI to try to enhance their marketing. They don't have that filter or that lens to look at it with to even know if it is decent or not, And that's where I think it's really challenging. And I don't have the solution to that. I don't know if you do either. My other thought there is that if you do produce marketing, I see in some consumer groups there is a stigma against using chat or using AI for marketing materials. I see instances where it is super helpful, but I've also seen, for example, writing a product description for your e-commerce website, okay? You've got a Delmonico steak. What is a Delmonico? How are we going to cook it? How are we going to use it? We could use AI to write that product description. So then does that mean at the bottom of that I think I'm asking two different questions here. At the bottom of that for attribution, are we going to put this product description was partially created using AI, information in it may not be correct? Or do you just say was partially created using AI? Because I worry about the perception of consumers who might be AI hesitant if they are reading that it was created with AI. Then again, if you're creating AI slop, consumers who are AI hesitant are probably going to recognize that AI slop pretty quickly and be turned off also. That was a little rambly. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I like that as a nuance to sort of think about. One of the things I've been doing as a sort of like an active user currently is I use adversarial prompts. So once I've created something or once I've done something, I've given it back and been like, what's wrong with this? Be a critic, right? Be a very rude, like train it. Say, I'm an AI hesitant consumer. Pretend that I am very resistant to sort of anything that's AI generated and review what you just did. What are they going to recognize that's clearly AI generated? How can we do this? I think on the attribution, it works so well. I mean, it's crazy. So like in our world, we have peer review. So we have these reviewers who look at all of our things, which is a really great thing. It's a weird, but it's a great thing. But I'll literally just be like, be the most rude reviewer who is hung up on this aspect, right? And review everything we just did and tell me why it's wrong. And then I have to process sort of like all of that critique because I find it as like it really is helpful for me as a thought exercise. Well, I don't care about point number 3. You're wrong because you're wrong, right? Or whatever. Point number 5, solid. I have to address point number 5. So I think that's one way internally within AI.
I can't remember if it was you or somebody else that suggested this too, was to pit different AI tools against each other. If you created it in ChatGPT, go to Claude and say, ChatGPT created this. How would you make it better? Right? And I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that that kind of competition between the two will give you better results instead of just staying in the same tool to go to a different one and get its feedback as well.
That was Aaron Shue, the CTO at Acres. He said that. I have found that there are different tasks that I entrust to different AI models. So I currently am a subscriber to ChatGPT and to Claude, and I find Claude to be not as good at generating text or thinking sort of like in verbally in like written communication. I find it's better. And so like I'll a lot of times take something from Claude and let ChatGPT revise it just to kind of sync. And I know in the coding aspect, if you're really deep in the world of writing code, that is very common because there's efficient code and there's inefficient code. And if you can identify little inefficiencies that one model did, it's very beneficial. So I know that's a practice that happens. Your question about attribution of do you write at the bottom, and I think that I don't know. And I wish that there was more guidelines for this. In my head, if it's a website and you've used AI to help you generate product descriptions, like I would put it as a disclaimer at the bottom, right? I think that sort of like may or may not be right. This is where I would go back to sort of the author. Is the author comfortable with owning the how to prepare a Delmonico steak? Because like I can imagine a world where the people I know who are really passionate about meat, right? Like it's not a right or wrong thing, right? This is the right way to prepare meat. Whether it works for you or does not, there was a right way to prepare this cut. And so in some senses, I'm like, well, I feel fairly comfortable with that, right? Or you could cite the standard. So you need to get to, 145 for safety. I don't know what it is in steak.
It's not that high. But yeah, you could give general guidelines. You might find this interesting with your research background. One of my pet peeves is that almost every recipe website, and therefore every ChatGPT, every AI tool, tells you to let your steaks sit out for 45 minutes before you cook them to bring them up to room temperature. Do you know how much the temperature that actually changes of that steak in 45? Not enough to have any difference on the cooking whatsoever. But I can't tell if AI put that in or if a person did, because it's just a general myth that is out there. And so again, like it doesn't necessarily mean it's AI slop to me. It's just somebody who believes that myth, which I hope people listening aren't like, Katie, that is, of course we have to do that. No, we don't. Just skip it, you guys. So,
well, I grew up in a household where like meat, this is going to sound horrible, that we're not violating any laws, but like meat sat out. My wife, she taught food safety. And so like we do not, in my home, meat never sits out, right? But contrast that with like when I go home and I am with my parents, right? There's long periods of time where the meat is going to come to the correct temperature.
Just set it out on the counter the night before, right? And then that's how my parents do it too.
Yeah. So I think that like there's an interesting sort of like, well, who gave that advice? Was that somebody's like for legal reasons, you have to claim that it can only be sat out for 45? I'm assuming that's part of it. And we censor it, right? So you and I are censoring it and like, well, that's obviously nonsense.
The other thing I was going to say about both of our parents is I'm pretty sure that they probably overcooked their meat too. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're listening. That eliminates a lot of the food safety issues too.
We got like by high school time, like my parents like hit pure foodie. So it was like well done until I was about 14. And then it was like, we're going to do everything we can to make this the best thing that's ever happened.
Yeah, that happens when you no longer have the young kids that you're just trying to feed really quickly, right? And they can start paying attention to food again. But anyway, okay, we got off track, that as happens with me often. Back to guidelines for your grad students is, are we producing something that they are proud to put their name on that passes muster? Are there other general guidelines that you would recommend, that apply to either your grad students, your regular students, or our farmers and butchers?
A lot of what I'm thinking for with grad students is what a grad student wants to do is they want to solve the problem of how do I understand this really complex and disperse research findings that have happened since we started recording history until today on a certain topic, right? And that's a very daunting task. It takes a long time to sort of get your head wrapped around what has happened. Where are we currently at in the field? Are we asking a reasonable, practical, researchable question for today? And what would be the way that we would go about doing that process? And what I find is that they often, in the bad case scenario, they are just using Claude or ChatGPT or Llama as their only source of get me up to speed on this thing. And so what I have suggested to them and require of them is that they would show me a textbook that uses the method that they use, right? Instead of it being like Claude suggested this method and I used it. I'm like, show me the textbook where we chose the right method and why that applies to our research question. And then with sort of their literature review too, show me the 3 or 4 papers that really matter for this specific topic. You need to identify them, which means that you've had to gone through a lot of different iterations of trying to find which ones matter for me. And so what I find is, even though I just encourage people to stay within Claude and use adversarial prompts, in my world where we're trying to be extremely precise, is like having those fallbacks to kind of tried and true methods of sort of identifying, no, this was something that we agreed in 2025 was sort of the standard. Well, let's go back to that 2025 standard and figure it out. Or it's maybe the 2012, or maybe it's the 1972. And so that's the one problem I have is when you allow that thought process between you and Claude to not include information coming from other places. But it's usually because there's not a lot of context for that person, right? They're being forced into researching a topic where maybe they don't have full context. Okay, so this gets me perfect segue on accident into the farmers and processors. Is one of the things that as a small business owner that I constantly felt was overwhelmed by the world of information and things that I should be doing better, because I had to manage HR, I had to manage marketing, I had to manage my capital investments, I had to manage my finances and my relationship with my banker, I had to manage my family, I had to, right, like all of these things. And you have all of these tasks that you have to do, and you are woefully prepared for many of them, right? So I have a lecture at the beginning of my farm management class, which lists out, someone defined a list, I think it is 12 key skills that a successful farmer must have. And I was like, I remember back that I had 2 that I would claim to have had expertise in, right? The remaining 10, I felt completely inadequate to be able to engage it in any way, shape, or form. And those are things that I have an undergraduate degree in farm business management. You would think that if anyone should feel like they have at least 4, it should have been me, right? Like, so, and I think that sort of even thinking about marketing, like if I were to start a business right now, thinking about marketing and how do I interact with sort of digital marketing and all those things, like, man, it is so stressful to think about like, how would I manage that when my livelihood depends on being decent at this skill is very stressful. So I just want to acknowledge that. And my mom, I had this great conversation with her where basically what I said is like, hey, I worked with you for 10 years and I observed you as your child running this business since I was a small kid. And you always felt like you weren't great at this. And now I have this whole other job where I do this whole other thing and I interact with lots of other people. And what I want to tell you is like, you're great at this, right? You're really, really good. And she came back and she was like, that was really helpful. It gave me a lot more confidence. So what I think AI can do is help to bring us up to speed and increase our confidence in the ways that we approach our marketing, our HR, right? It may not be the perfect solution, but it is a great education partner. And I should probably be concerned that I'm saying that in an institution of higher learning, encouraging it. But I do think because I believe so much that it's really good at aggregating and synthesizing information. If you want to learn about the world of digital marketing, if you want to learn about the world of financial management, if you want to learn about, right, it is a great partner in those things and it lowers the barrier. You don't have to go to the library anymore and check out the book from 1922 that talks about the fundamentals of marketing, right? You can start today on ChatGPT. So that's one of the things that excites me is for people who are a tiny bit fearless in their pursuit of more education and curiosity. I think it is an incredible partner for that. So I'm not sure why my mind went from your first question to what I just said, but I do feel passionate about that. I think that is an opportunity for small business owners who my gut tells me are feeling a tiny bit overwhelmed by having to be good at all these tasks. I would like to think that AI is a way to increase your confidence and to help you identify what are at least sort of the simple additions. I think about it in the sense of making those small changes as opposed to being like, I'm now an expert in HR. Maybe like, what are the simple, practical steps that I can do to become better at managing people? I think that's the barrier. It's not like you're going to have a black belt in HR, but.
Right. No, I love that. And I was just thinking back to my bookkeeping piece, like maybe I need to have ChatGPT create me a little bookkeeping course that is specific to what I need to know for my business, you know, or just to help me understand it better or something like that. I like that idea a lot. So, we could talk about this forever. That's why I keep doing more episodes on AI.
I do have one thing that I have, like, this is something that just happened this last week. It's a forming thought, is that if you want to use AI for tasks, the more context or an example or something you've used in the past that you can provide, the quicker you're going to get to something that's actually going to help you in the future. If you go dead cold, ChatGPT has no idea what you're talking about, and you're trying to prompt from dead zero all the way up to something that's practical, you're going to struggle. If you provide it something that looks like what you think you want, or you can provide some example or some historic sort of like, here's the data that I would like to be able to visualize in this way. That is a incredible efficiency increasing process for using any AI tool. That is through conversations with grad students in the last week, where we have spun wheels for weeks trying to start from zero. And then if you take something that's already created, we get to 70% of the way so quick. So that would be the other thing, is like priming it with like, here's an ad that I've observed that I love.
Right. Or here's a website that another meat e-commerce website that I love, or look at these, product descriptions or something like that and mimic these. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, Chad, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, I think we are going to have to do another episode sometime. Are you available for consultations on AI or anything like that at this point, or not really?
They can always reach out. If I don't answer, it is definitely not personal. I'm a little bit like the absent-minded professor, so send me another email. So I work at Purdue University. You can Google me And I'd love to interact with you. I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of like, can AI solve? I think in farmer language because I'm a farmer, but the deeper I get into this, I really see it as small business owners, right? Small, medium-sized business owners. And I think there's general fundamental things I at least have opinions on. And I like the topic. So I'm learning every time I interact with people, I'm learning, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we'll love it. It's such a quickly changing topic, and there's so many new things coming out all the time that I feel like it's really hard to keep up. But at the same time, people want to give it a try and see what they can do with it. And that's where sometimes it's like, oh, we need some training wheels or some guidance like you've been able to give us today. So thank you again, Chad. I'm sure we'll continue this discussion on AI and maybe the 12 or 9 skills you need for farm management sometime as well.
Well, thanks for having me. I've loved it. I love this kind of stuff.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Meat Success. We hope this episode gave you fresh insights and inspiration to beef up your meat marketing. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and share with your fellow farmers and butchers. Have questions or ideas for future podcasts? Reach out to choplocaluniversity.com. Until next time, remember, there's more than one recipe for meat success.